The Four Iddhipādas, quite often translated as four bases of power, four roads to power, four roads to success, four manifestations. Iddhi is the Pali for more or less powers, and these would be psychic powers. And pada is path, so path to psychic mastery or something like that. And I've never given a talk on this. This is quite fascinating, though. I think, monks probably talk about it, especially in the Thai forest tradition, where there's a living tradition of deep practice and the side effects of special psychic capacities and kind of unusual supernormal events and so forth are, part of the standard conversation, part of the ethos there. Certainly if you read the suttas in the time of the Buddha, this whole ethos of supernormal, what we would call in the West miraculous kind of experiences and so forth are going on. But so that Buddhism doesn't attribute them to, they're not miracles, they're not suspensions of anything, they're just they're part of some lawful structure of psychology and physics. There's some way that these laws intersect, and it's lawful. There's no suspension of law. So the idea in the West is that, some God is suspending the laws of physics temporarily or something like this, but from a Buddhist point of view, you don't have any intermediate, nobody is intervening. And if you understand how these things work, then one can gain competence or even mastery in those areas. But it's interesting to look at how they propose that you learn this. And in earlier cultures than Buddhism, so the Buddha is, the dates of the Buddha, like contemporary, I would say Western scholarship has kind of arrived at 480 BC to 400 BC. This is a new adjustment. It used to be 563 to 483. And then in Sri Lanka, it's even older. It's back into the 600s. So anyway, before the time of the Buddha, before the 5th century BC, there's a preceding kind of cultures they note these kind of unusual events, but they attribute it to supernatural beings or how to access them as rites and rituals. So mandalas and special spells and so forth, these mantras, like magical spells in the Vedic tradition. You'll see this kind of stuff again in Greek society and the Jewish society. There's supernormal kind of events happening, but they're not usually all that sort of under control or understood at, how to approach them. So the Four Iddhipadas, the four roads to these supernormal capacities, are quite understandable, and they're kind of like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Anybody know the answer? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, yes. You don't need it's not a street map. You need to practice to get to Carnegie Hall. And you have to practice a lot. And you have to practice the right way, not the wrong way. And you have to be very zealous as well, because it's going to take everything you have. So zeal, in fact, is the first of the four roads to success in supernormal or this kind of special kind of mental activities. So chanda is the word for this, and one of the translations is zeal, but it could be just strong interest, very, very strong interest. You really have to be interested in this. And people are, look what they can do. They can do fantastic, almost, ordinary people can't do what some people can. And this has to do something with talent as well. It's beyond the capacities of normal people. And of course, in the intellectual areas, an Einstein or a Newton, there's all kinds of geniuses that ordinary people, even bright people, even when you work hard at it, you can't do it. It's beyond understanding almost how they do it, but it's not like Einstein didn't say, just God sent me relativity, that's all. I was sitting around one day and he just whispered in my ear. But he did describe his process. He said, actually, the process, how I got my ideas, is not a lot of computation or anything like that. It was mostly playing the violin and meditation, or what he would call meditation, like being quiet in his room, just a lot of time going by in quiet and silence. He wouldn't let anybody speak to him during the day, including his wife. And that was a bit of a problem. So somehow he's opening and finding ways to allow intuition to come into this as well. So he's describing these processes. But he's obviously extremely interested as well. And this chanda. I want to say, by the way, one of the definitions of the Idipatas is that the Buddha gives it in a sutta. He says, this is the way from this shore to the farther shore. So the development of these Idipatas is not just for the purposes of special psychic capacities, but it's actually to attain enlightenment. And so you'll see how it's interwoven. These four are interwoven into the 37 factors of awakening as well. So chanda is necessary, a strong drive and interest and aspiration and zealous motivations. But you're not just aspiring to psychic capacities, special psychic capacities. It's in the service of this process to the far shore. The far shore is always a simile for nibbana. So this shore is samsara, where it floods. The flood come over. This is why do you want to go to the other shore? The raft to the other shore. The raft is the teachings, and the person needs the raft to get to the other shore. In those days, people didn't swim much, so they need a raft. So the raft is actually not the Tom Sawyer kind of raft, Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn going down the Mississippi. It's a bundle of sticks is what it is, lashed together with some vines. And what those are is a bundle of teachings, just a small bundle of teachings, because remember, it's very hard to get access to the Pali Canon that wasn't written down or anything like that. So all you could get was snatches of it, a few suttas, a few sort of central things, a little exposure to the 5 faculties or the Eightfold Path, and you strap those together and you headed for the far shore. As long as you didn't drown on the way, you had enough teachings to get you across. And by the way, that simile, I don't want to get too far off my topic, but that simile is, how does the man, he doesn't just float, he's got to actually go to the other shore. So how does he do that? He uses both hands and both feet. And what are both hands and both feet? The both hands are the prevention and removal. So it's right effort. 4 right efforts are how the man and the bundle of teachings that he's collected gets across the river. He paddles with both hands, prevention and removal of the 5 hindrances, and both feet, which is the creation of the 7 factors of enlightenment and the sustaining and development of those. Those are the kicking. And so he needs all 4 of the limbs to get across. And so this right effort is very, very critical to the process, but he's got to be very zealous to enter the river to begin with. Most people, as the Buddha says, I think it's in the Dhammapada, most people run up and down this shore. They just run up and down this shore. They don't think, it's going to flood one of these days, I got to get across there. It's like Florida or whatever. Half the world actually it's a beautiful simile for this time, the sea level rise and where are you going to go? I know we're at 1,100 meters, so we're safe. Yes, so this is critical. And of course, if you want to do a PhD as well, you got to have a lot of zeal. If you want to play concert violin, you got to have a lot of zeal. If you want to make the NFL, you got to have a lot of zeal and a little bit of stupidity as well. So you're going to lose some brain cells there. So make sure this doesn't get out on the internet. So the means is not mystical. It's what you bring. So these 4 Iddhipadas, the paths to the mystical, the supernormal, the strange, is conventional. It's what is required to succeed at high level for anything. You need strong zeal. And the next one is not surprising. It's virya, our old friend, energy and effort. So you have to make effort, and that would be the man kicking and paddling. The efforts involve all of the things I've been talking about, the 9 forms of effort that are laced through the 37 requisites. Effort and energy occur 9 times. The most of all of the factors. It is has the highest score. You see the kind of efforts the Buddha made. When he was a bodhisattva, his efforts were extraordinary. He came to the edge of death. Unfortunately, he was going in the wrong direction. And that might be a little lesson in this zeal. There is a nice saying, and I don't know where I heard it, but it struck me. Zeal without wisdom is like running in the dark. You just run right into a tree. So this is why, read your Boy Scout manual. When you get lost in the forest at night, don't run. Sit down and calm down. So zeal has to be well directed. The bodhisattva was extraordinarily zealous, but he was misdirected. And this is, you can see, just review your own life. And everybody in this room is zealous, actually. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. So you've made all kinds of efforts and stuff in your life, and some of them have been misdirected. You can look back on them and think, yeah, right. Put a lot of work into that, and it turned out that was the wrong direction. But you were gung-ho on it. So zeal has to have other conditions attached to it, and we will get to those. But you can't just be zealous, you need to make effort, and the effort must be skillful, and the efforts here is clear that you're not just praying for something to happen. It's not magical thinking involving rites and rituals, but it's the kind of efforts where you're investigating your own mental processes, eliminating things that you probably identify with, your temper or your desires and so forth, that's in a sense your sense of self has to come under scrutiny, and that's what the challenge of meditation and right effort is, that you have to remove stuff that is your way of walking through life. The strategies that you probably learned as a kid or learned by imitating your parents or something may not be skillful, and you have to actually undo them. And that's why most people don't meditate or try this, because it's a more or less a threat to your conventional understanding of who you are, because you're not going to be that person anymore. You're not going to fly off the handle. You're not going to use anger to get your way. All kinds of things you're not going to just crash out for a couple of days and indulge in sloth and so forth. These are all being challenged. So this is like a redoing of the entire sense of self. And you can't be complacent either, because the new, positive, different ways of doing things have to be brought into existence. It just takes inquiry and searching around and getting information and hearing teachings, reading the teachings, researching, thinking about it, turning it over. And this takes effort. But because you're zealous, you're willing to do it. The next one is just chitta. It's vague, rather vague. Chitta just means the mind processes. But the Buddha is saying this isn't done by walking in circles or sacrificing a lamb or something like that. It's not done that way. It's done with your mind. You have to cultivate, develop, and refine your mental processes. And that's how it happens. It's your mind is how it happens. It's how you think, how you remember, how you predict, all of the functions of the mind. In fact, self-inquiry into how it works. By the way, so chitta comes up again in the four foundations of mindfulness. It's the third category. We haven't talked about the four foundations of mindfulness. Of course, you've all heard all about it before, but not in this retreat. We haven't got to that set of four. But anyway, the third of the four foundations of mindfulness is chitta nupassana, chitta. And this is the third of the four Iddhipāda, chitta. And that's all it says, chitta. Chitta is given in the four foundations of mindfulness as one of the simplest of the foundations. It's, do you know, when you look at your mind, are you angry or not? Greedy or not? Delusional or not? Expansive or contracted? Surpassable or unsurpassable? Surpassable and unsurpassable means, are you at the highest state that you have been? Is your mind as lucid and clear as you are capable of now? It doesn't mean that you are enlightened. It means that in your evaluation, is this as lucid and focused and clear as you've been, and as far as you can go. Of course, you have to know that. Lots of people, have no idea of how to assess themselves in these meditation. They come to me and tell me that they had this great meditation and everything, and I really don't think they did. But they can't evaluate. There's so much going on in the mind that they haven't even begun to understand what's going on, because what I'm seeing is this, as they're claiming to have a good meditation. That's just, they don't know what a good meditation is, and so when they report it back, so it's like going, you're not musical or untrained and so forth. You go to a concert, wow, that was so great. No, it wasn't. It was pretty bad, so out of tune. It was so bad. But the person has no way of knowing if you to know the mind is like compared to what? Because that's the problem. You can't know anybody else's mind. You can only see your own mind, and you guess about everybody else's. So it's been with you, so you don't know compared to that person. And this is sort of what you learn in school. It's like you write out your answers and everything, and then you get back your test, and you get a C, and Johnny gets a B. And so he apparently, you're not so good at it as Johnny, And how would you know before that, How would you know? Even like, are you smart? How would you know? Because smart is not an absolute thing, it's just a relative thing. Smart compared to what? To your dog? Yeah, you're pretty smart. Very smart. Right off the canine IQ scale, right? You're a genius. Compared to a dog, you're a genius. But compared to other people, etc. So these are all comparisons and a lack of like self-understanding. So chitta is a lot to do with that, evaluating and understanding yourself. By the way, the Buddha has an interesting... Somebody came to the Buddha and asked about what it is to be good and bad and so forth. Who's a good person? Who's a bad person? So he said, the man asked the Buddha, can a good person know if another person is good? Can a good person know if another person is bad? Can a bad person know if another person is good? Can a bad person know if another person is bad? And you can think about that for a sec before I tell you the answer from the Buddha. Think. Yeah? Okay. Here's the answer. So the Buddha says, it is impossible. It cannot be that a bad person can know if another person is good. It is impossible. Cannot be. If a bad person can know if another person is bad. It is possible and likely that a good person can know if another person is good. It is possible and likely that a good person can know if another person is bad. And you think, how can that be? Let's change it to a tone-deaf person. Can a tone-deaf person know if another person is tone-deaf? No, because they're tone-deaf. Can a tone-deaf person know if another person is good, sang well? No. Can a person who has good pitch and can sing, can they know if another person is a bad singer? Yes, likely. Can they know if another person is a good singer? Likely. But if you don't have the capacity in yourself, if you're tone-deaf, if you're moral deaf, then you have no sense of your own condition, and you don't have a sense of anybody else's either, because you're lacking in that. So part of the training process is to evaluate yourself. Well, how would you even start? The Buddha is just a great teacher. He's not interested in impressing you or being obscure or anything. He gives you these like rudimentary exercises. Here's your 5 precepts. Can you stay within the bounds of that? A good person can stay in the bounds of the 5 precepts. And if you can't, if you keep going over them, you have to question, why do you keep going over them? It's telling you something about the workings of your mind. So why can't you sing why can't you sing on pitch? Why can't you play the violin on pitch? You need to listen more carefully. What is the right pitch? What are you too in haste? Are you doing it too fast? Have you not listened to it enough, or etc.? So you have to inquire. So that usually what drives people over the boundaries of the precepts is greed, hatred, delusion. A person can't remember anything, or they're confused and or intoxicated and so forth over the boundaries. They're strongly greedy, so they'll step over certain boundaries. They're infatuated by fame, that's a form of greed. For personal recognition, they'll step over these boundaries. So you start to see, well, if I can't stay inside, I guess I don't understand. And then the next process is, well, what is it that keeps pushing me over these boundaries? That tells me a lot about the mind. I can learn about my mind by my behavior, and how do I speak as well. Speech and action can tell me something about my motivations, my mind, and I can learn about that. So that is, in my estimate, what the Buddha is talking about with this citta. The thing about the Four Iddhipadas is really vague and obscure. There's hardly any real detailed writings about it. You can look throughout the Pali Canon, and it's like the Eightfold Path, the 7 factors, 5 faculties, 5 powers, all of the other 37 are quite well articulated, all kinds of details and so forth. These are the least articulated, most obscure, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I haven't given any talks about it. But at the same time, there's a lot of descriptions about the effects of these Idipatas in terms of these unusual powers that are said to have been gained mostly by monks, certainly the Buddha himself, and many of the leading disciples displayed these capacities. But before I talk about those, I want to just get to the fourth of the Idipatas. It's called Vimamsa. And it is basically similar to the other factors which are around wisdom. So in the seven Bojjhangas, the 7 factors of enlightenment, we have Dhamma Vichaya, investigation of Dhamma, of truth, the Dhammic truth. And we have Panya, so in the 5 faculties and the 5 powers, the 5th one is Panya, wisdom. So Vimamsa is correlated with Panya, wisdom, and investigation. And in the Eightfold Path, right view, there's also a form of intelligence, wisdom, and the point of the exercise, which everything else supports, the development of right view. And anything else? There's 5 that are all related in terms of wisdom. I think I got them. Yeah, I got them all. Yeah. So right view, Dhamma Vichaya. So in the Eightfold Path, right view, 7 factors, Dhamma Vichaya. Panya in 5 faculties, Panya in 5 powers, and then Vimamsa in the 4 Iddhipadas. So this is an intelligent inquiry into the workings of the mind. And this is like, for instance, in modern times, unless there's all kinds of people actually interested in this, you have this huge kind of religious cultural background where people are claimed to display all kinds of knowledges and stuff that don't fit in sort of modern rationalistic ideas. But there's a huge history and all kinds of traditions of this. So some people keep that up, and then excessive rationalism and skepticism, technological preferences and so forth, often say, well, that didn't happen. They just were they were either mistaken or they were trying to put one over on people, or something like this. But so what happens is, if you're raised in a system like that, you won't actually inquire into this, and you won't actually consistently even try to do any of this, because you, right off the bat, you presume it can't happen, so you'd be wasting your time. I mean, even in the time of the Buddha, there would be all kinds of people that presume such things are impossible to do. Nobody can do that. But, as I say, there's remarkable capacities of people. There's a few people that seem to be able to remember every hour of their life back to 2 or earlier. And they can demonstrate it at any time. I mean, what did you have for breakfast yesterday? I don't remember, but this person knows what the color of the socks they were wearing on Wednesday of 1956 at 9 o'clock in the morning, and what cereal they were eating, and what color their sweater was, and everything. The absolute complete. This is staggering, Others can do pi to, 7,000, 22,000 places, like I can do 2 plus 2. It's 5, isn't it? Yeah. Check me on that. So absolute recall of music. So, some of the conductors have absolute every note of 70 or 80, 90 symphonies and can perform by memory. This staggering amount of things. And then, of course, we do have people who spontaneously seem to have, or report to have, recall of a previous life. So here actually we get into one of the Idipatas. And this is you can actually acquire memory, supernormal memory. And you can acquire and develop possibly detailed memory of previous lives. Now why, especially in the West, where it's not the common view of things, most people never occurred to them to try, because you don't have a previous life. You pop out of nothing, and then if you're a Christian, you go into eternity, but you came out of nothing. And if you're a nihilist materialist, you came out of nothing, and you go back to nothing. But if you're a Buddhist, surprise, surprise. By the way, Buddhists are not very interested in the stories about the afterlife. You notice there's a lot of magazine articles and all these like, so-and-so, experienced the afterlife and saw the afterlife. And if Buddhists, generally, you're not interested in this because, why? This is the afterlife. It's the one after the previous one, so I can tell you all about it, Christians are interested in the afterlife because they presume there is no previous life. Well, what a weird presumption. Where did they get this idea? Apparently they did have a council about this, a council of Nicaea, and they had to decide, they had heard about this prior lives, and should they admit it into the doctrines that were being demanded. So Christianity was told to clean up their act by the emperor because nobody could decide what Christianity was. So they had to get together and say, no, I want it clear. I want to know which books go in and which stay out and what ideas stay in. So you guys get together, a group of you, and just clean it up. And so they had to decide, was the soul in existence before this or not? So they decided, no. Simple as that. And there were political reasons for this as well. They also had to vote, do women have a soul? Passed by 1 or 2 votes. Yes, you do have a soul. You can relax. From a Buddhist point of view, none of you have a soul. At least we're equal opportunists. So, strangely enough, you find in the Judaic, what Christianity came out of, some of them have a doctrine of reincarnation, previous existences. All of the great Greek philosophers also Socrates, Plato, all had, in fact, Pythagoras he recalled 4 previous lives. And this is, you go to university and study Greek philosophy, it's virtually never mentioned. And this is the whole motivation of their philosophy, was to guess what? To get out of the wheel of becoming. This is Socrates and Plato. And Aristotle went to study with Plato at 17 in order aspiring to get off the wheel of becoming. I can read out a statement by Plato about the deathless that you cannot distinguish from the Buddha's definition of nibbana. This is what he's aspiring to, the deathless. Yeah. Anyway, and they had methods. The Greeks had methods of trying to recall it, because obviously most people don't, and so the Buddhists also had. So why do some recall it? And so there's a systematic structure for recollection of previous lives. You can even go one better, and you can remember somebody else's lives. So read their mind enough. So the Buddhists seem to be able to see the previous lives of other people. So that's even like another level of the game. But I think that some people certainly have a good sense of their own personal history just in this life, just in one life. They have a good, balanced and clear sense of and memory of the things they did, moral, usually what sticks with you are moral events, right? Things that you were involved in, that you were proud of or ashamed of, or something like this is the kind of the strong content of that. And that's kind of what more or less modern psychology and modern psychiatry really is like kind of trying to read into the history, the personal history of another person. Why are you having problems? Let's go back. I want to see into your past. I want to see, and so some people seem to be very intuitive about this. I think something happened to you as a kid. I think something happened to you as a kid, and that's why you feel this way. So this is seeing into another person's past, but the Buddha takes it. So, big revelation, Freud, he has special techniques. He wants to get back to he wants to uncover your personal history, which you can't access. So what does he do? Hypnosis. He tries to it's just something like a Buddhist technique. Is like we're trying to find special techniques in order to uncover memory and see where certain things are coming from. So this is also the sense of this karma, like karma events in the past that are having results now. So there's two words, right? Kama, or karma, which is in common vocabulary now, everybody, karma, and there's vipaka, which is the resultant of karma. Most people use this, that's your karma. But actually what they mean is that's your vipaka, that's the results of your karma. And your karma is something intentionally done. Not your fate, but some intentional action that was done in the past and is now having a resultant of fruition. So kind of like insight into that. This is happening because of that. So those kind of things, certainly in Asian society, it's just commonly accepted, and in the West, probably because of Christian influences and modern physics and so forth, materialistic ideas, the idea of previous life and the next life are under great scrutiny. So there's a lot of resistance, but if you go to a culture that is a Buddhist culture or has a doctrine, there's other cultures that have the notion of rebirth, reincarnation, so forth. It's commonly accepted and might be much more accessible because you don't have kind of a barrier to it, so you might be able to get to it more easily. It's kind of like going to a culture where women had a subjugated role, and if you bring up the idea that women are equal or can do all these things, it never occurred to them, because the whole culture doesn't allow that. But then you go to a culture that allows all these things, and we have all kinds of. We've been through like 7 revolutions in the last 40 years of social revolutions about people, racial things, gender things, sexual things, everything, thing, and it's strange. You can walk around almost hypnotized, well, literally hypnotized by the culture, and then somebody says, "Wait a second, do you not notice that? Did you not notice that those people of color can't come into this restaurant?" And why is that? Well, because it's obvious. No, it's not obvious. That's got to go. So, and it's like coming out of a hypnotic state. Like, what? How did anybody think like that? Well, you see people who have been in that, like, believe that, and then they come out of it and they think, what was I thinking? Like, how did that happen? How was I convinced of that? How did I not see that? Because there's no indication that you should inquire or examine this at all. So this is the Buddha is remarkable. He is going against the stream of all kinds of strategies at the time as well, including the caste system, all kinds of strange ideas, rejecting rites and rituals and magical ideas and sacrifice of animals. There's even sacrifice of humans, up to that time. So what are you doing? Don't you see these things are alive, intelligent, conscious beings like you are? Like, don't hurt them. This is like a unthought of thing that he's seeing, because he's developed this supernormal focus, concentration, and intelligent inquiry, seeing new things. And then he's thinking, how do I communicate this with others? How do I tell them what they have to develop in order to see this? So this is like, in modern times, we've come up, this first thing, the kid has to learn to read and write. They have to go to we've got to start them at 4 or 5, because before we get this information across, they have to be literate, So there's all kind of like preliminary trainings and stuff that you have to assemble in order to get any of these capacities. So I think more or less the psychic ideas, that which is produced by extraordinary capacities of the mind, are more acceptable to people. Some people would deny that it's possible, but others would say, well, the mind, it's amazing what the mind can do. And then there's other things that are really run against modern ideas about physics, So some of these iddhis, these powers, are the capacity to, move through the air, bodily move through the air, as they speak of basically flying through the air cross-legged, like a bird. Although birds don't fly cross-legged, but like a bird. But the monk or the person is cross-legged, passing through solid objects, even like mountains, and walking on water. That one might ring a bell. Walking on water. So that, 500 years before Christ, walking around on water. So there's a number of sort of iddhis, special powers that are reported, which really would be very difficult to square with the idea that physics is consistent. So there's various attitudes to that. There's one attitude is that these are experiences that one has that if you're in a highly concentrated state of mind, you experience the movement from one point to another as almost as like flying, that your body is as light as air, and it is equivalent to being just to floating, I always see this in poetry, and somebody's in love and they go to visit their girlfriend, and they float, they walk, they fly on the wings of love, whatever. People describe this also on drugs, etc. So that's one attitude. It's kind of a psychologizing these things, and that's certainly confirmable. I think, well, not everybody, but I think some of you, even in this room, have had, just experiences of weightless body, gravityless body. There's just sometimes special things happen, special ways of being happen. And we generally describe it as subjective experience rather than objective. But it's impossible to distinguish. It felt real as it gets. Now, the opposite is probably more common. You can feel as heavy as lead. In deep depression, you can feel that you weigh a ton. It is impossible to get out of bed. And it's real. And the scale, you can stand on the scale, it won't say that you weigh 3,000 pounds. It'll say 127. But whatever the scale says is virtually irrelevant to the total encompassing reality of your being. It's you weigh 3,000 pounds. And the scale just doesn't get it. So we can see it in the negative things and sometimes in the positive things as well. But they're saying that by the purification of the mind, by cultivating these things again and again, and of course you're removed from all distractions, and you're spending days and weeks and months and years at this in low sensory environments, cultivating these things, then these type of things, I have no doubt that they're reporting, they're not making it up, and they're not lying. There's such wide reporting of this. And conversation, especially, of course, for monks, you cannot report such supernormal events falsely, otherwise you can be disrobed for that. A false claim of supernormal attainments is a disrobing offense. So monks are very, very careful about that. And then so these accounts, it's not something that you just want to claim. So I think that one way or another, this stuff happens, and we leave it to people to explore, and certainly these idea of reading people's minds or knowing things at a distance and all this seem to me very credible and real and confirmable. And I think there are lots of accounts, and of course past life accounts as well. Lots of cases where people get this person, and usually it's a child, says, I was such and such a person, I lived such and such a place, this is how I died, this is my name, I was married to such and such, I had kids and so forth, and then you go and find that family, the person, the case, how they died and everything. So there's large numbers of cases collected of this. You see this whole 6 volumes by Ian Stevenson, University of Virginia. There's 2,400 cases that they have collected from around the world of this, especially with children. So there's lots of sort of evidence that this kind of thing is hard to explain any other way. I mean, there's hard evidence. So the mental things, I think a lot of people would be open to. this objective physical thing, others would have more hesitation with that. But if you allow it to be a full subjective experience, then it certainly, you see more people who claim such things. And if you allow it to be a subjective but real experience, then it's more easy to accept. So that's a little on this, my first talk on the Idipatas. I'll leave that for you tonight.